I think first and foremost, the United States, as part of its rebalancing campaign in the Asia-Pacific region, has viewed China's growing missile capabilities as a challenge to the current status quo, or at least the current domination of US forces in the Pacific region. Enhancing a ballistic missile defense umbrella in the region allows the United States to maintain the upper hand in many ways, but unfortunately, because of China's proliferation of missile technologies, it's creating an arms race in the region. US policymakers would prefer China not to be spending so much money on these sophisticated weapons systems, and I'm sure many Chinese leaders would agree with that. But they say the People's Liberation Army has to face up to the possibility of a contingency in the region, and certainly a confrontation using ballistic missile technologies is at the forefront of their minds.
You mentioned North Korea there as well. How much of this policy is designed towards containing a possible threat from North Korea?
Ostensibly, the most serious threat in the region is from the North Korean regime. Whilst there have been friction between Japan and other countries inside what's known as the First Island chain over territorial issues, for example, North Korea is the only country that's aggressively attacked its rival in the south over the last 2 or 3 years. It's also actively developing a nuclear missile program, and the United States has armed both Japan and the Republic of Korea in a way to try to contain that. And most recently, North Korea's intent was demonstrated by its failed so-called satellite launch, which would have had a trajectory through Japanese territory and east of Taiwan, and of course that will annoy the Chinese as well.
There are some analysts that claim that the US missile defense technology that they're proposing to install in Japan and possibly the Philippines is in fact no match for Chinese missiles. Do you agree with that statement?
Ballistic missile umbrellas themselves are largely untested beasts. If you look at the missile shield that's being discussed in Europe, for example, in many ways it's a sort of paper operation. But if you look at China's capabilities, in particular anti-satellite technologies and anti-missile missiles, I think that's more of a concern for the United States. The ability for China to maintain a second strike capability by preventing the targeting of its own arsenals by missiles from any adversary. China's capabilities in space, the ability to intercept and destroy rivals' missiles and satellite infrastructure in space, is where this new rivalry is moving. And if the United States maintains dominance in this arena, then it'll be okay. But if it doesn't, then you could look at the rules of the game changing in the region.
And just moving back to the missile defense system in Russia, that has obviously involved quite a diplomatic spat between Washington and Moscow. Can the US really afford a similar problem with Beijing?
I think the United States has calculated that it can, and it's willing to meet any challenge in the Pacific region, and hence a lot of the rhetoric we've been hearing from the Pentagon and elsewhere, and from President Obama himself, about a new shift in focus towards the Pacific region. In a broader strategic sense, if you look at global capital heading to the Far East currently, and growth is happening out in Asia, but it's in decline and in recession in Europe, for example. The U.S. argument is that it has to protect its own growth, and by enhancing its capabilities in the Pacific region, that will meet those expectations.